Welcome to the Prednisone Pharmacist YouTube video. Today, we are so lucky. We get to hear from the bone coach, Kevin Ellis. He has an amazing journey to share with us, all about being diagnosed with osteoporosis in his 30s, and then what he discovered to do about it. What people on prednisone need to know is that osteoporosis is slowly creeping up on you. And so this is a must listen to so that you can know how to not let it take you unawares. All right, Kevin, I'm going to read your bio as soon as I let you give you a chance to say hello.
Hey, Megan, thanks so much for having me. I'm glad to be here.
Wonderful. So Kevin, he's a bone coach. He's a certified integrative health coach. He's a popular podcaster and YouTuber, that's for sure. He's a bone health advocate and founder of bonecoach.com. After his own debilitating health issues and an osteoporosis diagnosis in his early 30s, he eventually cracked the code to improving his health and has committed his life to helping others do the same. Through his life-changing and transformational coaching programs, he has helped people in over 1,500 cities around the world with osteopenia and osteoporosis address bone loss, build bone strength, stop fearing fracture, and lead active lives. Backed by the support of a world-class team focused on all areas of bone health, women's health, and hormones, stress reduction, sleep improvement, safe and effective exercise, understanding and interpreting lab tests, and bone healthy nutrition, he helps people every single day take back their futures that were put into question through an evidence-based approach grounded in science and simplicity. He's most famous for helping people with osteopenia and osteoporosis gain clarity and confidence that improving it is possible. His mission is to help over 1 million people around the world to build stronger bones. So first of all, that is a crazy story, being diagnosed with osteoporosis in your 30s. Can you dive more into that? Because that just seems unbelievable. Like, osteoporosis is for old people, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's what most people think, right? Osteoporosis is mostly only found in, the elderly and things like that, but that's not actually the case. And for me, my personal health journey, actually, my whole story, it didn't start with me just running this, bone coaching program, helping people all over the world. It actually started with my own health challenges. So, my personal health journey really started when I was a lot younger. And actually, I go back as far as, when I was born. When my mother was 5 months pregnant with me, my father was told he had cancer. And 2 months after I was born, he passed away. He was 35. And my entire life, I've had this fear that I was going to follow in his footsteps to an early grave, not have the opportunity to grow up and, watch my kids experience the joys of being a father. And when I was diagnosed with osteoporosis in my early 30s, at a time when I was still struggling to resolve all these other health issues, I thought my fate was destined to be the same. I had gut health issues, fatigue, no energy. Celiac disease was a primary contributor, nutrient malabsorption over many, many years, all these different things. I thought my fate was going to be the same as my father. I had a young daughter. I had a son on the way. I was devastated. I remember the day the doctor sat down with me and confirmed I had osteoporosis, not just a letter in the mail, like actually sat down with me. And her exact words were, "This is going to be an issue for you. Bone drugs and fracture were my future." And I walked out of that office afraid. And for the people who know me well, they know I'm not typically the most emotional person. Okay. And there are very few things that strike fear into my heart, but that did. And when I got home that night, I was laying on the couch across from my wife. My daughter was upstairs sleeping. And I looked up and I saw my favorite picture of her on the wall. She was a little over 1 year old, wearing this cute polka dot dress, standing in front of a white picket fence, blonde hair, blue eyes, innocent, sweet as could be. And I just broke down crying. And, I cried hard. It was the kind of cry that just empties the sum of life's burdens. And after I was done, I looked over at my wife and I said, "I just want to dance with my daughter on her wedding day." She needed her daddy. And I questioned whether I'd even be alive to be there for her. And for those first couple of days and weeks after I was diagnosed with osteoporosis, I just kept thinking, why is this happening to me? This doesn't make sense. How is this possible? Is this my fault? What will my life be like moving forward? How will my life change? Am I the only person my age going through this? I was angry, upset, overwhelmed, and I was scared. I had no idea where to start. And really, I just wanted to know that everything was going to be okay. And after a great deal of reading and research and working with different doctors and consulting with many different people, my mindset started to shift from those feelings and emotions of fear and overwhelm and defeat to feelings of determination. It shifted to, I'm going to be there for my family and my kids. I'm going to take the information I learned and start making progress. I'm going to improve my body and my bones. And when you get to that point where your mindset shifts, it's empowering, it's liberating, and it allows you to view your circumstances from a different perspective. And once I got to the point where I had scoured through the research, consulted with a lot of different people, and started applying those things I had been learning and was actually on the path to improvement, that's when I realized just how challenging it can be for the average person, mostly the average woman, who's diagnosed with osteopenia or osteoporosis, and to figure out what they need to be doing to address bone loss, build bone strength, prevent fractures so they can lead an active life. Because the standard prescription for 90% of women who are diagnosed is calcium, vitamin D, walking, and a bone drug. And that's woefully inadequate. And it's really for that reason that I started Bone Coach and bonecoach.com.
That's awesome. I mean, that's what I was taught too, is just those cornerstones, just calcium, vitamin D, and here's a bone drug. Good luck with the side effects.
Yeah.
And that's just not enough. There's so much more to bones than just calcium and vitamin D. And so I'd really like to know, what really is osteoporosis? Because I know that what I understood of osteoporosis was totally wrong. So can you explain more what osteoporosis is?
Absolutely. So osteoporosis literally means porous bone. It's a disease characterized by not enough bone formation, excessive bone loss. So especially if someone is taking prednisone, there could be bone loss. There's going to be bone loss taking place, or it's a combination of both. In osteoporosis, both bone quality and bone density are going to be reduced, which increases the risk of fracture. And the way you find out you have osteoporosis is through a DEXA scan, dual energy X-ray absorptiometry scan. It's a painless test, kind of like an X-ray, but very low levels of radiation. And you lay down on the machine does a scan to tell you your bone mineral density. So the actual bone mineral content or the bone in your bones. And then it generates a score. And this score is called a T-score. And a T-score is comparing your bone mineral density to that of a healthy young adult. A score of 0 means your BMD is equal to the norm for a healthy young adult. And a score of +1 and -1 is considered normal or healthy. A T-score between -1 and -2.5 indicates that you have low bone mass, oftentimes called osteopenia. And then a T-score of -2.5 or lower indicates that you have osteoporosis. So -2.6, 2.7, -2.8, and so on and so forth. The greater the negative number, the more severe the osteoporosis. And that's really based on the World Health Organization's criteria. Most women are going to get these scans done by the time they're in their 50s and 60s as a check in the box. Their doctors will order them, but if you haven't done one yet, okay, especially if you're taking prednisone, get a baseline now. Get a baseline. It doesn't matter if you're 30 years old and you know you're going to be taking prednisone, get a baseline now so that you can monitor changes over time. You need to do it. And you know, it's like I said, it's good to get a baseline because we don't want to avoid finding something out just because we don't want to know the answer to it. Okay, we don't want to be ignorant in this situation. So it's best to always get these answers up front because you can't address something until you're aware of it.
Yeah, I thought when I was started on prednisone that I was just going to be on it for a week and then everything would be okay. But it turned out that I was stuck on it for almost 9 months. And like desperately wish I had gotten a DEXA scan at the beginning so I could know how much bone loss I really had. So that's a fantastic tip. So what else can we do about prednisone? I mean, prednisone causing osteoporosis. What normally happens when somebody gets a diagnosis of osteoporosis, and what should they do first, and what would you
Sure.
recommend?
Sure. Well, first, I think it's important to understand that there are kind of some myths and misconceptions around what takes place with your bone health, bone loss, and osteoporosis. Because a lot of times when people find out they have osteoporosis, they're made to feel like they have to do something immediately or else they're going to fracture. And that's not always the case. You know, a chronic condition like osteoporosis, where something bone loss takes place maybe over a period of time, or maybe you just didn't build up enough bone in the first place, things like that. It requires more than a quick fix. Okay. So if we're told we have to act immediately to prevent fracture, that might not actually be true. And in fact, it could be the wrong decision for that person. Okay. So that's why I like to say chronic conditions need more than acute solutions. And when it comes to our bone health, I tell people to imagine you have a bucket of water. Okay. This bucket represents your body, and the water within this bucket represents your bone mineral density, the measure of how much bone you have. Then I tell people to visualize, that this bucket has a small hole in it with a very tiny leak. And over time, over years and years and years, that water level gets lower and lower and lower until one day you realize your water is low. You go, you get a bone density scan, you realize you have low bone density. You have osteopenia or osteoporosis, and you're shocked. I thought my bucket was full of water. And usually it's either one of two scenarios. Either you have a bunch of other health issues, and that's what led you to get a DEXA scan. Maybe you're on prednisone or something like that. Or you're on the opposite end of the spectrum. You work out, you think you're eating healthy and doing everything right. You get a DEXA scan as a check in the box, and then you find out you have osteopenia or osteoporosis. And either of those two scenarios, the immediate visceral reaction, like mine was, how do I fix this right now? You know, we have this impending sense of doom, this desperate scramble to secure our future, and this desire to reach some sort of resolution. And sometimes we make quick, drastic decisions, sometimes influenced by other people, to immediately plug the hole and fill our buckets back up with water. And we do this before identifying where the hole is, what caused it, or if there was even a hole in the first place, because their bucket may not have been full of water to begin with. So then I ask, would you try to fill your bucket up with water if you knew there was still a hole in it? Okay. In other words, would you try to immediately improve your low bone density, something that likely took years and years to develop, without first understanding what's causing it, if you're still actively losing bone, or if you just never built up enough bone in your younger years? Unfortunately, and I see this all the time, rarely do people come to me and know these answers. Okay. They don't know the answers to these questions. So let's just start with the first one. And, is there a hole in your bucket? Okay. So another way of asking this question, are you still actively losing bone? A single DEXA scan or a single bone density scan will not tell you that. You need to know the answer to this before you make decisions, because if there is something causing bone loss, like prednisone, for example, that is something we know contributes to bone loss, but we don't want to just make an assumption and say, oh, well, that's the only thing. We need to objectively figure these things out, because if there's something else contributing or accelerating that loss, it has to be addressed. Because if not, you will continue to lose bone, and that bone loss could be at a more rapid rate than had we not, made the assumption in the first place. And if we're losing bone density, we are losing bone strength, which is going to increase our risk of fracture. Unfortunately, most people don't know the answer to that, if there are other things contributing beyond just prednisone, and most doctors aren't actually checking and looking into those things. So one of the ways to know if you have really high levels of bone loss or elevated levels of bone loss would be through something called a serum CTX, a CT low peptide test. This test looks at the activity level of cells that are breaking down bone. And if that activity level is really high, or even moderately elevated, that can be an indicator of active bone loss. And even if it's not really elevated, and most of the time, you know, if we're taking prednisone, we know prednisone contributes to bone loss, there will be some elevation there most likely. Okay. So let's talk about the next question as it relates to this bucket metaphor. I'm going to continue carrying this on here. What caused the hole? The next question we need to ask is, what caused the hole? We need to figure out what's causing the bone loss. If there are multiple things contributing to that. And I think it'd be best if I even just explain the different types of osteoporosis. So there's primary osteoporosis, which is typically related to a decrease in estrogen in postmenopausal women. Estrogen has a protective effect on bone. When estrogen levels decrease, as they do during menopause, it causes an increase in the activity level of cells that break down bone. But there's a whole nother cause of osteoporosis, and that's secondary osteoporosis. This is the category I fell into. People, taking prednisone, this is a category they're going to fall into also. And this is where osteoporosis occurs as a result of behaviors, conditions, diseases, disorders, and medications. Okay. Most people are unexpectedly diagnosed in their 30s, 40s, and 50s, even in their 60s, have or had a secondary cause. And if that cause is still contributing to bone loss, you need to figure it out and you need to address it. An important point I want to make here is there can be multiple causes. Just because you're a postmenopausal woman does not mean that is the sole cause of your bone loss. It could be more than just hormones. There could be something else. Just because you're taking prednisone does not mean there's not something else contributing to bone loss. Okay. And I'm gonna come back to this again because there are things here that I want to dig into a little bit more. But the next question that we need to ask is, was your bucket not full from the start? What's important to keep in mind is if you are diagnosed with osteoporosis, it does not automatically mean you are actively losing bone. You may just not have built up enough bone in your younger years. Up to 90% of your bone mass is acquired by age 18. Okay, and that's going to peak by the time you turn 30. So by the time you turn 30, your bucket is about as full as it's going to be. So if when you were younger, you had an eating disorder, you had poor nutrition, low calcium and vitamin D intake, if you smoked or drank excessively, if you led a sedentary lifestyle, or if you took certain medications, those all could have prevented you from achieving peak bone mass and starting with a full bucket. So a lot of times when we're told we need to take action immediately, we need to remember chronic conditions need more than acute solutions. Osteoporosis takes years and sometimes a lifetime to develop. It can be accelerated when we're taking prednisone, that bone loss can. But before you take action, you just have to get those answers first, period. Okay. You need to figure out what's going on with your bucket.
That is so true. I think a lot of people on prednisone are taking it for an autoimmune condition, and we need to get to the root cause of that too. And they're probably related, the cause of osteoporosis and the cause of autoimmune. And so finding out what is truly causing it is vital. Oh my goodness. Yes. So then what if all we do is just take calcium and vitamin D, are we good? Or is there more to it than that?
Yeah, a lot more to it than that. Like I said, usually the standard recommendation when someone is told they have osteoporosis is, like I said, calcium, vitamin D, walking, and a bone medication. There is more to that. I think the next most important piece after we figure out what's going on with the bucket is understanding that healthy bones aren't built by what you eat. They're built by what you absorb. Now, what I want you to do is forget about the bucket for a minute. Okay, we're going to use a completely different metaphor here. If you think of our bodies and our bones as being like plants, in order to grow, they need nutrients and the right conditions, right? Most people focus so much on the nutrients, the salads, the smoothies, the supplements, that they fail to consider the soil. Our gut is like the soil. So we absorb almost everything here. So when we take in our food or our supplements, we start to break them down into smaller pieces in our mouth. That food makes its way into our stomach where it's a churn in this acidic mix where it breaks it down even further. Then it makes its way to the small intestine, our soil. And this is where nutrients are broken down to their smallest form to be absorbed by us, the plants. But in order to absorb anything, we need roots in our soil. And our roots are called villi. And they're these tiny hair-like projections that cover our small intestine and are responsible for absorbing nutrients. They absorb nutrients from the food you eat and the supplements you take, and then shuttle those nutrients into your bloodstream so they can travel where they're needed in the body, whether that's for healing a cut on your hand, growing your hair or fingernails, or rebuilding stronger bones. The job of our roots is so important that the total surface area they use to absorb nutrients is the size of a football field.
Holy cow.
How amazing is that, right? But when we have poor digestion and our gut health isn't optimal, we can't properly break down our food. And when we can't properly break down our food, nutrients won't be available. And if nutrients aren't available, the villi won't be able to absorb them. And the body will not have the raw materials and resources needed to build stronger, healthier bones. So where do we have to start? Okay, let's start with our nutrients making it to your soil. If you have bloating, belching, burping, excessive gas, and even diarrhea after meals, or you feel like food just sits in your stomach and stagnates for a long time, there is a good chance you have low stomach acid. Age, stress, nutrient deficiencies, gut infections are all contributors. Surprisingly, do you know what one of the best indicators of low stomach acid is? Reflux. Shocking, right? Shocking, right? And when people have reflux, what do they take for it? The same thing I took for a number of years. Tums, proton pump inhibitors like Prilosec, Prevacid, Nexium, Omeprazole. And like most people who take PPIs, I mistakenly thought I had too much stomach acid. So I ended up suppressing what little stomach acid I did have. The reason that's a problem is because we need stomach acid to properly break down and extract nutrients from our food, like amino acids, the building blocks of protein. Our bones are 50% protein by volume. They need amino acids. Calcium. Calcium is the primary mineral constituent of our bones. Low stomach acid reduces its absorption. Magnesium, iron, B12. If you have low stomach acid, you will be starved of these nutrients and others. Okay, so that's the first part of that. Now, other problems can arise if your soil has the wrong balance of bugs, okay, which we would call dysbiosis. The presence of bad bugs, which would be gut infections, or even good bugs in the wrong place, which we would call SIBO, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. These bugs make up our microbiome. And when our microbiome is out of balance, it negatively affects your body's ability to absorb nutrients and contributes to leaky gut and systemic inflammation, both of which are bad for our body and bones. So how do you know if your bugs are not balanced? Well, you may be experiencing bloating, belching, excessive gas, heartburn, constipation, diarrhea, even fatigue. Those could all be indicators. Okay. And then the next thing we need to look at is, are your roots working properly? There are multiple conditions and diseases that can affect your body's ability to absorb nutrients. Celiac disease is one of them. And it's one of the primary reasons I developed osteoporosis in my early 30s. Okay, how does celiac disease contribute to nutrient malabsorption and bone loss? When you ingest gluten, those villi, our roots, become blunted to the point where they can't do their job. So for me, my roots effectively became damaged, and my body was starved of key bone healthy nutrients, like calcium and vitamin D and all these other important nutrients. And those are usually absorbed a little higher up in the small intestine where more damage is likely to occur. And this went on for years. And I had no idea calcium was being raked from my bones to serve other purposes. And the greatest challenge I see here is that a large percentage of people who have celiac disease, they don't even know it because they don't have the classic GI symptoms. So you may not even be aware your roots are being damaged. And with 1 to 3% of the US population, close to 5% of all people with osteoporosis having celiac disease, it's important to know if you have it and if your roots are being damaged. Okay. And I would say too, a lot of times, if someone has one autoimmune condition, they are more likely to have another autoimmune condition. So if you're taking prednisone and you have an autoimmune disease that you're taking prednisone for, that you're trying to address, there could be another autoimmune condition that may not being, have been addressed yet. So that's another important thing to keep in mind. In terms of celiac disease, the test you'd want to look at here would be the tissue transglutaminase test, TTG-IgA. That's just one of them. There are some other ones out there, other different antibody tests too. But you have to be consuming gluten during a period of, about 30 days to make sure those antibodies are elevated, so the test is actually going to work. The next thing I want to talk about is getting the right nutrients in the right amounts. Okay. The last thing we need to be asking here is, is your soil getting the right nutrients in the right amounts? Simply put, if you're not putting the right foods in your body, or you're eating the wrong foods, or you're not getting enough nutrients, or you're getting the right nutrients in the right amounts, you're going to have a really challenging time slowing, stopping, preventing more loss, and you're not going to build bone. Okay. How can we possibly expect to rebuild something that's not there? Right? Because our bones, they can only become what we're able to break down, absorb, and rebuild inside our bodies. And this is what I tell people. Every time you eat, you have the opportunity to give your body everything it needs to heal and rebuild itself. Honing in on the right diet for an individual's specific needs, I understand that. It's a constant struggle for most people with osteoporosis, even autoimmune conditions. It can be a challenge for people to figure that out. It's so much more than just drink a bunch of milk or alkalize your body with green vegetables. And people are asking me all the time, like, okay, so what's the perfect diet? And I think that's the golden question, right? And you know what my response is? It depends. And people hate that response, but it really does depend. We are all biochemically and genetically unique individuals. We respond to different foods and dietary approaches differently, which is why no dietary approach should be considered a rigid framework with zero flexibility. All right. It's also why when you see someone saying everyone should eat this specific superfood because it's guaranteed to be good for your body and your bones, make note of it, but realize that it might not work for you. Because no matter how much of a superfood something or health food someone claims something is, or how great they say it is for your bones, if it creates inflammation in your body, it is not a health food for you. Where you are in your health journey, that's another important consideration. If you're working to overcome digestive issues, bacterial overgrowth, candida, put autoimmune disease into remission, your dietary approach will differ significantly from those who are not. Okay, so just some really, when it comes to diet, digestion, absorption, really, really important for our bone health, our general health, and osteoporosis.
And it's vital. Even if you know your bone health is awesome, prednisone is messing with that entire system. And so if you didn't care as much before, while you're on prednisone, at the very least is when you should care the very most, because you have no idea what is going on with your microbiome. What we do know is that prednisone is interfering with your ability to absorb nutrients. Prednisone is interfering with your ability to use them in the way you normally properly would. And so what he's saying is key, guys. Like, this is so important. So if somebody were to get a diagnosis of osteoporosis and it's like, all right, I guess I'm just going to have to never move again because I'm going to break. Is that true?
You would, I've had so many conversations with people that feel this way. I understand the feeling. When you're told you have osteoporosis and, you think you're just brittle and fragile. And I would say it's a major misconception that most people with osteopenia and osteoporosis have, is thinking I am permanently fragile. I get that. I really do. This is what I thought and I was led to believe. And it hurt. I was devastated because it ran directly counter to the core of who I was and how I viewed myself and my life experiences. For me, my life experiences, just some of them were like working on a farm. When I grew up, it was hard work, weathering the frustrations of an abusive stepfather, leading combat patrols in the Marine Corps Infantry in Southern Afghanistan. All of these experiences for me helped shape my personal identity of someone who was tough and someone who could endure. But the second I was diagnosed with osteoporosis, I felt like in a single fell swoop, that identity was taken from me, just stripped away. And, but now I've come to realize fate does not have to equal fracture. Now, if somebody has already had a fracture, and that's what prompted them to get a DEXA scan, which confirmed they have osteoporosis, this becomes even more important. But if you're like me, or you're like many women in their 50s and 60s, and you have had no fractures and only a DEXA scan as a check in the box, but shockingly, you found out you have osteoporosis, this is important to understand. And again, it's really important to understand if we already know we're taking medication that contributes to bone loss and osteoporosis is a very real possibility, or even if we're in the osteopenic stage, this is still important. Okay, so a lot of times we make the assumption, we're told fracture is a guarantee. We're induced into a state of panic and anxiety, which could lead us to decisions that may not be in our best interest. And especially if we haven't first identified what's going on with our bucket fully, or ensured that our roots and our soil are being nourished. Okay, but this little known fact has changed my thinking entirely. Bone density does not equate to bone strength. And what that means is when you're looking at your bone density results, your DEXA scan, you're not seeing the whole picture. It's like looking at online images of a house you're interested in buying. The house is there. You can see how many rooms it has, how many walls are there, and that it has a basement. But what you can't see is the quality of structure inside the walls, if the beams are infested with termites, and if the foundation is solid or ready to crack. And do you know what's really interesting? If the quality of the structure inside your walls is good, and you do everything you can right now to improve your bone health and build bone strength, or at the very least, slow or prevent or minimize more of that bone loss, even if you have osteoporosis, you may never fracture. Okay. And it reminds me of, that Maren Morris song. It's a country music song where she says, the house won't fall if the bones are good. Okay. The problem is, even though they're an important tool for diagnosing and monitoring osteoporosis, DEXA scans alone won't tell you if your bones are good. DEXA show the density of your bone. What it doesn't tell is the bone quality. And bone density and bone quality combine to create bone strength. So you only have part of the picture. And, there's a lot that goes into bone strength. There are new tools coming out to help look at that. And there are some tools available now to help look at that. But some of the things with regard to bone strength just can't be influenced. Age, genetics, gender, other factors, you just can't do anything about. Okay, but there are some things you can influence, and you can improve bone strength. Now, what I don't want to do here is give false hope and say that the fracture is not a possibility. It is. But is it for certain? Absolutely not. What we can do and what we need to do is ask ourselves, how can we build a better house, a better body, and better bones? What can we do to reinforce the foundation upon which we'll build? We focus on the things we can influence. And that has to be strength of body, strength of mind, and with that comes strength of bone. But before we can even get there, you need to ask yourself, does your house need fixing? Okay, hormones influence just about every biological process in your body. That includes bone being broken down and bone being formed. So, for example, if your levels of crucial hormones like estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, thyroid, parathyroid hormone, and others are too low or too high, it can cause more bone to be lost and less bone to be formed. If you have problems with your roots and your soil and you're not absorbing nutrients, your bones will suffer. Stress. This is a big one. And I want to dig into this for a minute. Comes in a lot of forms. Most of it psychological, fear, worry, emotionally charged thoughts, career challenges, family conflict, finances, relationship issues, not being able to keep up with the perfect lives of the Joneses on social media. All of those contribute to and drive our stress response, that fight or flight response. And when we're chronically activating this fight or flight response and flooding our bodies with cortisol, which is, something obviously associated with glucocorticoid use, and we've got chronic stress, also that's going to run into problems. We're going to run into problems there. Okay. From a general health perspective, issues with cortisol and chronic stress are going to contribute to increased blood sugar. If you already have blood sugar regulation problems, excess cortisol is going to make that worse. It's going to contribute to weight gain and obesity, digestive issues and leaky gut. It's going to contribute to hormone imbalances. It's going to suppress your immune system. It's going to downregulate thyroid function, T3, T4, and TSH. And that's just a snapshot from a general health perspective. But what about your bones specifically? Chronic stress and issues with cortisol, number one, reduce progesterone production. Okay, so chronically elevated cortisol reduces your ability to make progesterone. Progesterone has a role in stimulating bone collagen formation and bone preservation. So when we're less stressed, the body produces more progesterone. Okay, it's going to reduce chronic stress and issues with cortisol is going to reduce the ability of your bone building cells to form bone. Another interesting note about progesterone has receptor sites on bone building cells, on these things called osteoblasts that promote bone formation. Okay, progesterone also protects the osteoblasts from damaging effects of cortisol. But when you're chronically stressed, bone building will be reduced. Okay, glucocorticoids, they are a natural steroid hormone also, and with powerful anti-inflammatory effects, but high levels of glucocorticoids kill osteocytes. And these are the cells that send out signals to start the bone building process. Okay, and studies have shown associations between high cortisol levels and low bone density. Increase in urinary excretion of calcium. Calcium, obviously an important mineral for our bones. And then high levels of cortisol block calcium absorption in the small intestine, or in the intestine, pardon me, which is going to decrease bone cell growth. So, and those are issues associated with prednisone use as well. So this becomes even more important here.
Prednisone is cortisol on steroids. That is literally what it is. And so all of these things are even worse on prednisone.
Yeah.
So can you dig into stress and what we can do about it a little bit more?
Yeah, sure. Oh, and that's as it can contribute to bone loss, obviously, and we need to make sure we're addressing it. That's another big thing there. But the other pieces that are really important that have to be addressed would be, if your nights are spent tossing and turning, which I know can happen if insomnia is a side effect of prednisone use, and you're not waking up well rested, that's a problem. Okay, studies have shown poor sleep is going to impair bone formation and reduce bone quality and strength. Sleep is super important. Muscle wasting. There's a major interplay between muscle and bone, and I mean major. When the muscles get stronger, the bones get stronger. So if you're losing muscle, you're working against this. And when you do start an exercise routine, we need to make sure that what we're doing is, number one, not going to contribute to more bone loss, that it will actually help build bone strength, and that most importantly, we're doing things in a way that are going to prevent fracture and injury. Okay. And if we haven't already fractured, and even if we have, we want to lean hard on the side of prevention. Okay. You want to make sure you're addressing these things appropriately. And, I would say, in summary, those are really the major components that play into addressing bone loss and building bone strength.
Wow. That was like drinking from a fire hose. This was amazing. Just seeing how bones aren't just on their own. They're not just this like rock, that they have effect on the whole body, and that prednisone causing osteoporosis can be affected by the entire body as well. And so it seems like it could be really overwhelming. So if somebody needs help with this, there's my dog, how do they go about getting help?
Sure. So I would say too, we need to make sure that we first do all the things that I kind of talked about here, right? So if you need to revisit this, we actually have this over at bonecoach.com. We have a free 7-day osteoporosis kickstart, and it's going to walk through step by step every single thing people need to be doing to start addressing bone loss, building bone strength, preventing fracture and injury. And that's a great starting point, because we need to make sure that we're figuring out what's going on with our bucket. We're identifying and addressing those body and bone stressors negatively affecting health, contributing to bone loss and bone damage. We have to address those things above and beyond just already knowing we're on prednisone. You got to go above and beyond that, so we don't make assumptions here. So we have to do that. Again, the next thing, you got to nourish. You have to make sure you're doing the right things for getting the right inputs that your body and your bones need for stronger, healthier bones through diet, through digestion, through absorption. You have to do it. And then the last part of that is build. You know, you got to build strength of body, strength of strength of bone, and you have to do it in a way that's going to prevent fracture and injury, and just make sure you're not doing things that are going to contribute to more bone loss. And again, a great starting point for that is over at bonecoach.com. We help people with this every single day. At this point, we've helped people in over 1,500 cities around the world, and that continues to grow each and every day. So we've got some great resources over there.
Wow, I'm so excited. I wish I had something like this when I was on my high doses of prednisone. So I could have known, all right, get your DEXA scan, and here are the 7-day kickstart of what you can do to get started of having stronger bones, because taking prednisone is not a life sentence for having fractures. And so there is hope, and there is help available at bonecoach.com. I am Dr. Megan, your prednisone pharmacist, and I am here to help you not just survive prednisone, but thrive while on prednisone. And finding people like Kevin who are experts is one of the ways I can help you, because he knows exactly how to take you from that scary diagnosis to having peace, that you're doing everything that you can to support your bones while taking prednisone. Signing off as Dr. Megan, your prednisone pharmacist.